It's human nature that we want to know, can you please tell me that we're making the right decision? And of course, you will never have certainty, but people will look for more information to make sure they're making the right decision, and they'll end up making the decision too slow and too late because they're so afraid of being wrong. The failure to embrace messiness and to over-index on data and predictability is because we're like, can't I cover my butt and make sure that I know this decision is going to go well? And that never happens. And when we do that, we do some of the dumbest things ever because we trust the numbers way too much. Welcome to At the Table, the podcast that lives at the intersection between leadership, teamwork, organizational health, and culture. My name is Pat Lencioni. I'm your host, joined by my co-host, Cody Thompson, out in Utah. How you doing, Cody?
I am doing well, Pat.
I got to tell you, Cody, every time I go someplace and people say, hey, I listen to your podcast, and they always ask questions about you. They're like, hey, and remember when Cody did this? And isn't it interesting? In Cody's office behind him, he has these different things. And it's just really fun. You know, we love our listeners, and it's fun to talk to people that listen to the podcast. And that was just to make you nervous.
Oh,
whatever
perfect.
You're saying, people are talking about it.
I had a neighbor drive by on a bicycle the other day and say, I listened to your podcast. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll take note of that. So
I better think a little harder about what I say.
Yeah.
What's the topic today, Cody?
The topic is the art of messiness.
That's right. The art of messiness. And this is one of those things that we were talking about recently. The messiness of business, the lack of precision in running a business is so much greater than we know. And even though that's how I got involved in this. I was a management consultant that did all this data analysis for our clients. And I've learned that they weren't really using it because they were so dysfunctional. And I thought, that's ridiculous. Why are we doing all this data for them? And then what they're really doing is using it for political reasons, and there's dysfunction. And that's how I got into this field. So I know that at the end of the day, there's so much more than precision data and predictability in business. And yet, even I, after 30 years of us having this firm, I'm still drawn into stories I see and people talking about, well, this product gives you more data, and that's how your company will be better. And then I stop and think, well, wait, I've been in the boardroom of those companies. I've been in the executive team meetings, and every time they make an important decision, it's data and information like that is so secondary or tertiary. It usually comes down to common sense and the interaction of the people sitting there. And running an organization and making decisions is so much messier than we know. And yet society will tell us that the best companies are really, it's all predictable and based on the science.
Yeah, I love it, Pat. It's the image I got as you were talking about that, because we see this over and over again. People get drawn into, like, even reconvinced over and over again that we have to lean more into what's predictable or formulaic when it comes to business. But it's almost like the image of a moth going to the light. You know, it's like we're constantly reminding people, like, hey, by the way, that can be helpful and informative, but business is far messier than that. And if you use that to kind of like dissuade yourself from thinking that the instincts and the intuition are not part of the decision, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But even us, we go back to the light sometimes.
Yeah. We're like, oh gosh, we need to get more data. And hey, data is really important and interesting and helpful, but it is not primary or even secondary when you make decisions. It's like usually a confirmation of what your gut is telling you, or are we missing something? Should we take a look at that? And you know what because the question I'm thinking, Cody, is why is this like this? And then I think about our first book. I wrote the 5 Temptations of a CEO. And one of the human nature things that CEOs do is they want certainty over clarity. It's human nature that we want to know, can you please tell me that we're making the right decision? And of course, you will never have certainty, but people will look for more information to corroborate that, to make sure they're making the right decision. And they'll end up making the decision too slow and too late because they're so afraid of being wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I think the idea of the failure to embrace messiness and to over-index on data and predictability is because we're like, can't I cover my butt and make sure that I know this decision is going to go well? And that never happens. And when we do that, when we try to get that, we do some of the dumbest things ever because we trust the numbers way too much.
I like how you put it. I think that you said it like there's a fear of failure, a fear of uncertainty. So we always move in the direction of what can make me more certain, more predictable, more formulaic about what the outcome might be, which I think some of that is a helpful, as we talk about discernment as a working genius. Like there's a version of this where you really do want to, iterate and evaluate ideas and make sure you're picking the right ones. But what's interesting is like, I was thinking about, how there are companies out there, Pat, that talk about, hey, I want you to take 10% of your time and you can volunteer your time to a charity of your choice, or you can, learn a different skill or something like that. I wonder if a better use of their time might be, hey, go do something you're going to fail at. Like, because I think that's implicit in here is like, we're so afraid of failing and what the implications could mean for my job, my career, or whatever else. But almost every time we fail at something, we learn from it.
Yeah.
And we're kind of preventing ourselves from learning by saying we were going to over-index on certainty.
What's interesting? I think there's two kinds of failure too. I mean, when you're making a decision, it's like, if I fail and I trust the numbers, well, I can say, well, that's what the numbers said.
Yeah.
But if I fail and I trust my gut, that is more personal.
Yeah.
And yet, how many times do people go, I didn't really believe those numbers. It didn't really have all the context in it. I kind of knew in my gut what we should do, but I thought I would cover myself by relying on the data, because then I could just fall back on it and say, well, that's what the data said. It's like when we watch football, and you got to tell your football story. It's great. But when we watch football and they say, is the coach going to go for it on 4th down? And people go, well, the numbers say, because like statistics show, but the numbers don't take into account momentum and injuries on the field. And there's so many variables involved. So when people go, well, the numbers say you should punt, I want to be the coach that says, I'm going to rely on integrating all of this information and then making a decision courageously based on what I think is the right thing to do. Tell us your story too about fantasy football.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two recent ones that kind of apply here, is because how ESPN now or football sites will put like the win probability.
I hate that.
I know, it's excruciating. But what's so interesting is like just the opening Sunday night game was the Ravens and Bills. And with 4 minutes left, the science said that the Ravens had a 99% chance to win the game, and they lost the game. And I think this is sort of the point we're trying to make, is like, hey, listen, if you're in if we're in a meeting, Pat, a boardroom, and it's like, hey, 99% chances that this is the right decision, but they lost the game, and business happens in real life. And so the story that I told you is, if you don't know fantasy football, they rank players, they predict how many points they'll have in the season, and all these experts say, here's where they should fall if you're drafting these players. So,
and to be fair, we have a fantasy league at work, and you and I are in that. Yeah.
We are, and neither of us are doing well. So, but last year I had a friend, and if you don't know who these players are, one of them was, he had a running back that was ranked much higher than my running back in the preseason rankings. And then I had a running back, Derrick Henry, who was ranked lower, but was performing really well. And we were trying to execute a trade. And his whole sentiment, which is when we were teasing out this idea, it was like all the experts said his running back was better. And he kept trying to trade me as if my player was the worst player. And I said, hey, listen, that's great, but I actually watch football. I'm seeing this with my own eyes. And I think that's the sentiment, is like, it's great to use data. It's great to use all that. But the privilege we have is we get to watch business happen in a lot of different environments. And over again, I feel like we keep yelling like, hey, that's not the way to go. Like
right.
Just relying on data is not the thing, because we watch real business happen and there's too many variables there.
Yes. And sometimes you're not looking at the right data. And that data clouds. Are you like, we just went through something at work where we were trying to solve a problem, and it was like, oh, let's look at the data. Let's get more information. And then we looked at it. Somebody said to me, we need to do more data, more research. And I said, can you just show me the problem? And they showed it to me. I said, well, that's it right there. And everybody was like, yeah, that is it. That's it. And it's not that I'm smarter. It's just, I have a natural distrust of data alone.
Yep.
And so sometimes being messy and say, let's just try to figure this out. That doesn't mean we won't go, now let's look at the data and see if we're just totally smoking rope here and we're off. But usually we'll look at it and go, we were actually looking at the wrong pieces of data, and it was going to send us off a cliff. But if you just look at something, this is an interesting thing, Cody. I was telling somebody about this the other day. When I was a kid and I studied math, I always got A's in math. I wouldn't consider myself super mathematical, but I felt the need to get an A. That's my own stuff. But I'd go into a test and I'd memorize all of the formulas. And then the word problems, the things we hate most, would come on, and I would panic. And I'd be going through all the different formulas. And I would never just look at it like a logical, common sense person and go, well, if they're going that way for 15 minutes and they're coming back this way for 20 minutes, then it's going to be this. And I'd be so grinding on things. And some of my friends would go, well, just think about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens in companies sometimes. We see companies make boneheaded decisions. They rebranded, they launched a new thing, and then they retracted it 2 months later. And you just think, hey, common sense would have prevented you from that mistake. But they're like, well, we did some data on customers and we looked at this and we had some focus groups and we looked at all the indicators. And it's like, well, how about talking to that guy over there with a 12th grade education who would have said, well, that's not going to work.
Yeah. And part of the reason we use the art of messiness in this is because like part of the discussion we were having in advance of the podcast was, is business more of an art or a science? And there's elements of both. But I think what we're seeing is a trend in the direction of people trying to say that business is mostly a science. In fact, like let's distill it down to some data, some AI, some efficiency metrics, and that can be the formula, the predictability of the success that we'll have in business. And I remember you and I in a pretty, very large company, kind of going through what we thought the problems were with this company, and the chief operating officer kind of acted as if business was just a science. He just was talking about, the efficiency metrics that they could get to in the operations of their business, and if they'd solve that, then everything is solved. And we were kind of like, I'm not sure that's what the customers are worried about or asking you for. And so there's just this seems to be kind of a pandemic of people thinking, well, if we get the right data and we have AI kind of help us discern the data, and we can kind of break business down into more of a science, then that's the recipe for success.
Yeah. And, and one of the reasons why I think this happens too is because there's a massive industries dependent on convincing people that if you buy their product, and I worked at Oracle in the earliest days of the company, and I've worked in other tech companies, and they were like, we have to convince people if they only get this database or they only have this app, that they're going to have all their problems solved. And of course, that never works, but they have to convince you of that. You never watch a golf tournament on TV and have some company come along and go, you don't need our stuff, just use your common sense. But they're like, hire our company that's on the hat of that golfer and we'll help you solve all your problems. And now we come to AI, which everybody's like, well, AI is going to replace a lot of jobs and make things faster. It will never replicate instinct, judgment, courage, integrative thinking. It just absolutely won't.
A kind of comical example of this, Pat, is like sometimes I think about like sketch comedy, and I like, what would be really kind of a funny, thing to think about or write about. And I remember thinking of one where, those rings that you put on your finger, that measure like your blood pressure and all this stuff. And I'm sure it's great information. But one of the things I often find funny is like, it gives you a sleep score. And I imagine like explaining that to a grandfather or something like, so you put this ring on, and if you don't sleep well, it will tell you that you didn't sleep well, give you a score. It's like, I was there. I slept in my own bed. I know that was a bad night. But too often we do this in our businesses where we talk about like internal NPS scores. It's like, okay, so what else you could do is like, you could go ask an employee, what's it like to work here? And I get that in a large organization, you want to kind of aggregate some of the sentiment. But do you really need an internal score to tell you whether or not people love working at your organization? Like that's another instinctive thing that we've somehow outsourced to data that seems wild to me.
Yeah, and none of this is to say that you shouldn't use data. You shouldn't buy a lot of these products that help you with the analysis and all these other things. But I've been thinking about getting one of those ring things because I had a Whoop and I lost the thing. I don't know, in our move, and I've been thinking about getting one. But the one thing is sometimes you wake up in the morning, I feel pretty good. And you look down at your thing. Oh my gosh, I slept horribly. It's like, I think I'm going to rely on this thing rather than on how I feel. So I think the idea is don't start with data. Don't start with predictability. Start with common sense. Use that other stuff to confirm or deny what you think your gut is telling you. And your fantasy football teams are going to win more games. Your company's going to do better. And you're going to feel a lot less afraid. Because the truth is, the best companies, and we've seen so many of them over the years, Cody. I wish I could convey to people how many times I've sat in in an executive team meeting of a big company, a good company, making a really hard decision, and nobody's got data on the table. Nobody's looking over they're going like, hey, we know the story, but it only gets us so far. Now we have to debate and argue and brainstorm and test things and then make a call that comes down to instinct.
It's more of an art than a science.
That's right. And I'm glad for that. That's what makes it fun. All righty, that's it today.
I love it.
Thank you, Cody.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. We love talking to you on the podcast, and we'll see you next time on At the Table. God bless.